This is Office Hours at Duke University. Today's conversation is with Nancy Allen, Duke's Vice Provost for Faculty Diversity and Faculty Development. The topic of diversity has been the focus of a 5-part series this week on the Duke Today website. Find it at duke.edu/today. Professor Allen was among those interviewed for the stories tracing Duke's efforts to improve its academic excellence by recruiting faculty and students from backgrounds not well represented at the school. Professor Paula McLean, another important voice in the series and a past president of Duke's Academics Council, was scheduled to be here but unfortunately cannot join us today. We should say that Professor Allen is also a medical doctor and continues her clinical practice. However, she is not here today to talk about rheumatology. We're talking about diversity and excellence at Duke. Everyone watching is invited to ask Professor Allen a question. To do that, post a comment on the Duke University Facebook page, tweet with the tag Duke Live, or email live@duke.edu. Professor Allen, we're here at your office hours to talk about diversity and excellence. So let's start with the background provided by this Duke Today series by Jeffrey Mock. Is it fair to summarize it by saying that Duke was behind the ball in the 80s in terms of racial diversity and then caught up in the 90s?
That is fair. We did start behind the 8 ball in the 80s and before that, and we've had a number of initiatives in the past 20 years that have eventually led to us being ahead of the game.
Very good. And so to bring us up to speed today, how would you summarize where Duke stands today in terms of its socioeconomic composition and the efforts it's making around diversity and excellence?
I think Duke is doing a very good job among our peers in similar schools, universities around the country. We do have higher percentages of faculty of color than many of our peers. In fact, most of our peers. We started with not very many black faculty in the 80s, and we now have about 4.5% of our faculty, generally the regular rank faculty, are black faculty.
Very good. And in taking a look back at the history of diversity at Duke, some of what you see in these stories is a kind of lessons learned about recruiting and the climate here on campus. What's some of the wisdom that you take away from past efforts around diversity and excellence?
Well, to go back to 1988, as Jeff Mock's story shows, in the Black Faculty Initiative that passed through Academic Council by 1 vote. It actually was a vote by the chair of the council that allowed that to pass. That initiative desired that we add 1 black faculty in every unit at the university. That was a 5-year effort, and it failed. So the next effort was the Black Faculty Strategic Initiative in 1993, which was a 10-year effort, and we succeeded in doubling the number of black faculty at Duke in the regular rank status over that time period. And even since that ended in 2003, we're continuing to use some of the strategies in recruitment that worked there, and we've expanded those in recent years.
And so what would some of those strategies be that were successful in a Black Faculty Strategic Initiative that are now applied more broadly?
I think it had to do with enlightenment of leadership, starting at the provost level and the deans, the members of individual departmental search committees. It came from pressure from faculty in underrepresented groups themselves, and those efforts are paying off. At the present time, as Senior Associate Dean and Associate Vice Provost Jacqueline Looney and I meet with search committee members in the campus departments, arts and sciences, Fuqua, law, divinity, and we review available individuals and pools of individuals. We help the search committees better target places where they may find faculty of color to bring to Duke, to give talks, even years before they might be faculty candidates. And making search committees aware of what the overall university strategies are has been helpful.
Now, in talking about gains made in this area, there seems to be a tension around numbers that comes up in this series of stories. And in fact, Professor Carla Holloway here at Duke is quoted in saying that diversity efforts can sometimes lapse into a so-called counting Negroes phenomena. So how do you handle this issue of quotas and counting?
That is an issue. That had to be a strategy early on in a way so that we would keep track of where we were and where we wanted to go. But I'd say in the past 5 to 6 years, particularly since we expanded into a faculty diversity initiative that was broader, it really allowed us to think more about clusters of faculty and critical mass of faculty in units where that actually has helped us build the faculty demographics beyond just numbers. We also have put attention towards mentoring our junior faculty and trying with associate professors to help them have the skills that they need to move through the ranks and to assist their departments and units in recruiting and retaining more faculty of a diverse variety.
Everyone watching is invited to jump into the conversation by asking a question of Dr. Allen. You can do that by posting the question on the Duke Facebook page, tweeting with the tag Duke Live, or emailing live@duke.edu. We've got a question here that comes by email from David, and he says, first, a get well shout out to Paula McLean. Now my question for Nancy Allen. In addition to working in the provost office at Duke, you are a practicing physician, a wife, and a mother. Do you think it's become easier or more difficult at Duke over the past several years for women faculty to balance their professional and personal lives? And how about minority faculty women? Do they face additional pressures?
Those are great questions, and those are things that I've cared about since I started at Duke in the late 1970s as an intern, joined the faculty in 1982, and actually had twins in 1986 at a time that Duke had no maternity or parental leave policies. So I've cared about those issues. I've cared about making Duke a more family-friendly and work-life-friendly place for everyone. So it has become, I'm not sure the word easier is totally applicable, but it's become more transparent perhaps that we have ways to help faculty with their work-life balance. Men are using excuse me, parental leave options at Duke and participating, I think, more in helping to care for their young family members and allowing their partner to pursue professional endeavors to the level that they desire. So we do have a good parental leave policy. We've got tenure clock relief that applies to faculty who take parental leave, and it also applies to other life stage issues such as caring excuse me, caring for an ill parent, child, or partner, doing extra service work in their department, and having issues such as a house fire that might put research on a little bit of a back burner for a period of time. So we're trying to be sensitive to the needs of faculty as they move through their careers in order to support their professional endeavors while they're dealing with home and personal issues. As far as minority, I think the second part of the question was about minority faculty. Yes, there are particular circumstances that apply to individuals and to groups at times. There's always been the issue when you have a small population of women or faculty of color. Those individuals may be called on to serve on every single committee or advise all of the students in a particular group in their unit, and that takes time, and it may take time away from research and the scholarly activities that the faculty member needs to do to move forward. So we're trying to be sensitive to that too.
Dr. Allen, you've been talking about flexibility and family-friendly policies. How does that tie in with these diversity efforts? What's the connection there?
Well, the connection is perhaps easier to see with women when we're talking about family-friendly policies, and I think that's the way those started. We do know that there are not very many women in, say, engineering or natural sciences. More women who do go through the graduate program, get their PhD, may end up in jobs that are outside the academy. And again, why is that? Part of it is that the timing of wishing to have children coincides with the early years on the faculty. And when you're trying to write, publish, teach, perhaps take care of patients as we do in the medical side, advise and mentor colleagues and students, that all comes together at one time and can be a daunting possibility. So we're trying to help with those early years particularly to allow more women to think about the academy as a place they want to spend professional time.
Dr. Allen, in talking about recruiting, you mentioned the term cluster and cluster hiring. It sort of implies a relational, social dimension, culture change. What does this word mean, cluster, when you're talking about diversity and excellence?
That's a strategy that's been used in recruitment when a department or a unit or a division in the medical side has opportunity to hire one or more individuals. If there are several individuals who rise to the top in the search and there are possibilities financially and otherwise to hire two or more people, you could see that if you are able to bring in two black faculty into a unit that had none before, that would create a nidus, if you will, or a good way to start changing the culture of that unit or department. And that's happened. You could see that, yes, there are more women teaching in women's studies and more African American faculty teaching in African and African American studies. But to have clusters in other units such as psychology and neuroscience or sociology or engineering. I can give a couple of examples. We had Dean Christina Johnson here for about 8 years as Dean of the Pratt School of Engineering, and she was able to more than double the number of women faculty in engineering in her time by concentrated efforts. And again, some of that was through cluster hiring, diversity hiring, and through the Faculty Diversity Initiative of 2003 and extending to the present time, the provost has provided some special funds to schools to hire women and faculty of color in areas where they are underrepresented.
Dr. Allen, you mentioned Dean Johnson, formerly Dean of the Pratt School of Engineering. In terms of clustering hire, is it important to begin with a senior person, someone and a person of leadership within a unit or department, or can it be kind of a ground up, begin with some junior faculty or even postdocs, grad students?
We use both. Certainly leadership is incredibly important. Not only the example of Dean Johnson, but we also look at Dr. Brenda Armstrong, who has been Dean of Admissions for the School of Medicine for a number of years. And she has been, again, incredibly important and successful in bringing Duke to a place where we have the highest percentage of medical students of color, and specifically black medical students among our peers. The ground up part works well too, so if there's pressure on leadership and membership in search committees where this issue is raised and attention is paid, that is very important. So I think it takes both, plus other strategies, some help from other administrators to make this happen.
Everyone watching is invited to join in this discussion about diversity and excellence here at Duke and on college campuses. To do that, post your question on the Duke University Facebook page, tweet it with the tag Duke Live, or email live@duke.edu. Dr. Allen, we've been talking about some strides that Duke has made in recruiting underrepresented minorities into the student body and the faculty. Of course, it's not been without controversy, and a big one back in 1991 when Henry Louis Gates left Duke. He called the university a plantation. And there's certainly been plenty of changes since then, but Duke is still a school in the South. It's got its same Georgian architecture, and there's still a service staff that is primarily black. What do you think about this plantation label? Is that a challenge for us?
Oh, I think it certainly was, and still parts of it could be a challenge. We're not there yet. The provost says in today's section of Jeffrey Mock's series that we've made many strides, but we're not there yet. We have more work to do. Certainly, Professor Gates' comments in 1991 were a big disappointment, but I think also a trigger to do more and to think more critically about how we were doing things and how we were recruiting and trying to retain faculty. It's one thing to get people here and another to really support them, mentor them, give them resources they need, and to listen to what the challenges and problems are in their day-to-day work here.
Dr. Allen, let's return to that issue of mentoring, but first we have a question here that comes by email from Jay, and he asks, what about people who aren't in the university administration business? Does it matter to the average non-Duke person whether Duke or other top private universities have diverse faculties and student bodies?
Oh, I think it does matter. I think it shows that we are interested in education in every circumstance. We all learn better when we're challenged with new issues and new ways of looking at things, and that's what we hope is enhanced by Duke's diversity in the student body and in the faculty and in our staff. It helps us in so many ways.
So let's pick up on mentoring, which you just mentioned, and that's been one of these lessons learned from recruitment initiatives. What does that look like? I mean, I don't think anyone's going to be against mentoring in principle, but how does it actually play out?
Mentoring means a lot of things to a lot of people. It is not just one way of doing things. Mentoring means in many ways to advise, to teach, to be a wise person who is helping the next generation or the next group of students, postdocs, fellows, faculty, to achieve their ideal status. So we have a number of initiatives. We have a document on the Provost website that was developed about 3 or 4 years ago that gives advice for the faculty member seeking a mentor, gives advice to department chairs in how they could best help with mentoring in their department. It gives advice for the deans of schools and the provost himself of what we need to keep track of in terms of mentoring. It's kind of a moving target. It's never going to be perfect, but we try to provide tools that people need to achieve their own success.
Everyone watching is invited to jump into the conversation by Facebook, by Twitter, or by email. We're talking about diversity and excellence here at Duke University. Dr. Allen, you've just been talking about mentoring. Any mentors for you that have been particularly formative, or vice versa, some younger people that you've mentored and now see out in the world as an example of good mentoring?
Oh, I've certainly had many wonderful mentors in my time, particularly in the field of medicine and my own field of rheumatology. Of course, in the early days, they were just about all men, and that's been fine. I've taught them a few things along the way too, I think. And then I've had mentors in the administrative field, certainly. Since I was academic council chair, the previous chairs, President Nan Cohan, Provost Lang currently in my role, I'm always learning from my peers and those with whom I work better ways to do things. In terms of whom I've mentored, I've done this my whole career. When I joined the faculty of the Department of Medicine in 1982, which is the largest department at Duke, but then only had 125 faculty, now over 400, there were only a few other women in the department. So I took it on myself to become one of the female mentors for other women coming along. And that has been very fruitful. It's wonderful for me now to see that 1/3 of the faculty in the School of Medicine and in my own department are women. I've got rheumatology former fellows who are spread all around the country, and I keep in touch with them through email and holiday cards and phone calls, and they still call me for advice.
Dr. Allen, in looking at challenges here, something sometimes said in response to difficulties of recruiting underrepresented minorities is, hey, the pipeline isn't there. We can't recruit the faculty because there aren't the grad students. We can't recruit the grad students because there aren't the qualified undergraduates, et cetera, et cetera. How do you address this pipeline issue?
Well, that's a bit of a cop-out in some ways. I look to Dean George McClendon, who is the Dean of Arts and Sciences, who says, even though there may not be a strong pipeline or pool of people who have a PhD in, astrophysics or whatever the area is, Duke should be able to go find the people who are out there and to network with those who are there to locate individuals who will be available within some short period of time. We need to contribute to the pipeline, and indeed many of the schools and other policies and programs at Duke are working on the pipeline, starting in kindergarten through 12 in some areas, looking at undergraduate populations and trying to engage them in research while they're here. We started a provost postdoctoral program several years ago, in part based on a Duke undergraduate at the time who suggested it and said, oh, UNC has had a program like this for many years, and of course we wanted to try to catch up with that. So we are trying a number of strategies to improve the pipeline, to pay attention to those who are in the pipeline and to go find them, and to go back to our own Duke undergraduates. Actually, 2 of our provost postdoctoral associates this year had been Duke undergraduates and then went off and got their PhDs at other institutions, and we've brought them back as postdocs.
Dr. Allen, another challenge that is put forward towards diversity efforts is this mismatch theory, which would say, particularly in recruiting undergraduates, high school students applying to college, is that even if a university goes out and is able to recruit a student who fits a profile, increases underrepresented minority numbers, it can actually be a disservice to that student if they don't then thrive in the environment of a highly powered academic culture. What do you say about mismatch?
Well, I understand that idea. I think we need to do the very best we can through a number of mechanisms to make sure that those students get the very best out of their Duke education and that they have the support and the advising and the mentoring that will help them succeed. I think it's hard at the outset to say who will succeed. I think Christoph Gutentag, our Dean of Admissions for Duke undergraduates, does a great job in bringing a wonderful group of students here who have a whole set of diverse backgrounds and interests and skills and abilities, and all of them coming together here help each other learn and grow and become world citizens.
Dr. Allen, another dimension of this that you started to mention there is the international aspect, and we've got an email question that's come in. It says, the Duke Today series argues that Duke's diversity efforts help make the university more competitive in the increasingly global world of higher education. Is Duke doing anything special to recruit international faculty and to address special needs they might have?
Duke is working towards bringing more international faculty here, and as most people recognize, we have more efforts to send our own faculty and to recruit faculty for locations in other countries. Fuqua School of Business has taken the lead in looking towards having programs in China and India and Russia and London. They've already been global beyond many of our other schools. We have a medical school in Singapore. So we have both Duke faculty going abroad and we have international faculty coming here. There are some special needs that those faculty have, but I think for the most part the efforts are at the school level and supported by the provost.
Dr. Allen, related to that, there's a tension that's brought up in this Duke Today series on diversity and excellence, which is that when you talk about international faculty and students, you can begin to achieve more and more racial diversity, but without necessarily addressing the historic situation of relations among races in the United States. I mean, this particularly plays out with Africans versus African Americans, but can be seen other ways. What about this tension about racial diversity, domestic versus international?
There is tension at times, and that is something that the leadership pays attention to in terms of the recruitment and retention and support for different faculty of different backgrounds and countries. What we've wanted to do is to maintain the efforts related to recruitment and retention of African American faculty, and indeed we've done that. We've kept track of the data since the end of the Black Faculty Strategic Initiative in 2003, and we are still recruiting at the same or a slightly higher clip than we were during that initiative related to African American faculty. So this is something that we are paying attention to. It hasn't been dropped. It is something that becomes complex as people move to different parts of the world and come back, and as Duke wants to forward our efforts related to the core values of interdisciplinarity, internationalization, and diversity.
Dr. Allen, we have about 100 people participating in this online office hours session. Everyone watching is invited to join the conversation by posting a question on the Duke University Facebook page, tweeting with the tag Duke Live, or emailing live@duke.edu. Dr. Allen, if we take a step back and look at the big picture here, diversity can, of course, be a highly political term and mean different things to different people. Here at Duke and in this series has been joined with the word excellence. So what do you think they mean when they're put together in the context of a college campus, diversity and excellence?
I think they do go together very well. We put together a website at Duke called diversity.duke.edu that actually Paula McLean, who couldn't be here today, had recommended to the provost about 3 years ago, and it was put in place 2 years ago. And the tagline there certainly has excellence in it also. They go hand in hand because Duke has become a better institution the more diverse we have become. As I alluded to earlier, in terms of education and the classroom and research, the broader the group of people thinking about a problem, the more efforts we place, and I think the better we are at educating ourselves and our students and the world. We can look at world problems in a broad way, and that's been very helpful.
Dr. Allen, another challenge that comes up in these conversations is the question, hey, what about intellectual diversity? If you have departments or whole schools with 80% registered Democrats, where's your worldview diversity? Is that something that you would be looking at, that the university is concerned about?
I think the university thinks about this, and I think the intellectual diversity is very broad. I think looking at it just based on voter registration is somewhat of a narrow way to look at it. I think as scholars we want to think about all sides of an issue, and whether a faculty member is a Republican or Democrat, that individual in the classroom should be able to help students bring out all levels of inquiry in those settings.
And Dr. Allen, what about for you personally? You began a career in medicine. Obviously, there's a lot of rigorous and demanding training in that. When did you start to say, you know, I'm also passionate about the socioeconomic makeup of my colleagues in this campus community? Was there a moment, or is that something that's evolved? Obviously, you're still practicing medicine. So what about your own passion for this topic?
Oh, it has evolved. You know, I think back to my medical school classes and my residency class, where I was certainly in the minority, and early faculty in the minority. So I don't know that there was just one moment, but after I came back from maternity leave in 1987, Dr. Joseph Greenfield, who was the chair of my department at the time, came to me and asked me to chair a committee on the status of women in the Department of Medicine, and I was happy to do that. Colleagues and I worked on issues related to safety, you know, medical residents walking to the parking garage in the dark at night at 2 in the morning, salary equity for faculty, even back then, parental leave policies, other such efforts. So I worked on them at the department level. I was elected, I think, because my name ends with an A, to academic council for a number of years in the 80s, and saw needs across the institution. So I served on an institutional maternity leave policy development in 1989, and that was the first university policy. I served on a university women's committee, medical center women's committees, and then I think back in the early 80s we were about at the same level as we were related to faculty of color and recruiting and retaining black faculty 15 to 20 years after that. So I could see the patterns and the needs to work on these issues and to make Duke a better place.
We have about 150 people participating in this office hours conversation. To jump in, you can ask a question by Facebook on the Duke University Facebook page, by Twitter with the tag Duke Live, or by email live@duke.edu. Dr. Allen, you were just talking about serving on the academic council, and we were hoping to have your colleague, Professor Paula McLean, a recent past president of Duke's academic council, to talk about this issue from a faculty perspective. And now, Dr. Allen, you are in administration, so talk about this tension with the issue of diversity being addressed by faculty, bottom up, if you will, or the administration top down, setting mandates. How does that work?
There are a variety of committees that work on specific issues. So, for example, I chair the Faculty Diversity Standing Committee, which was established in 2003, 2004. After the Provost Faculty Diversity Initiative, a 10-point plan was developed. So that committee may work on specific proposals, such as the principles of mentoring. It may work on specific documents and recommendations for the deans in terms of their recruitment and hiring strategies. And so that's basically a faculty committee with some administrative types from School of Medicine and the campus who then propose recommendations to the provost. Certainly, you know, I dream up things too for us to think about. And in 2006, we applied for and received an Alfred P. Sloan Award for Faculty Career Flexibility that provided substantial funding for us to work on issues related to work life at the faculty level.
Dr. Allen, you're mentioning some of the groups here that work on this issue of diversity. Of course, Duke also has an Office of Institutional Equity. What sort of an insider's guide for if someone wants to be engaged in this issue of diversity and excellence at Duke? What are the different groups, committees, people working on it here?
Oh, there are a lot of groups, starting with some student organizations, and certainly have a great partnership with Ben Reese, who is head of institutional equity, vice president for institutional equity. He serves on the Faculty Diversity Standing Committee and invites me to work on issues related to the work of his office. There are various task forces, the LGBT task force, lesbian, gay, bi, and transsexual task force that's made up of faculty and staff. There are some ad hoc groups that have come together, a Black Faculty Caucus in recent years, a Faculty Women's Network, which has been active at different times over the past 25 years, and quite a number of other organizations.
Dr. Allen, that is great. We've got about 170 people participating in the office hours here, and anyone can jump in by Facebook, Twitter, or email. We've got an email question from Niels who says, for those who may be unfamiliar with Duke, what would you say is the thing that is most distinctive about Duke? What makes it different from some of the country's other top universities, whether it involves diversity or something completely different?
Oh, Duke is a special place. Of course, I've lived all of my academic life here, over 31 years since I came as an intern in medicine. But it is a wonderful place that brings people together, again, from more and more different places. It is vibrant in every single school. The efforts related to interdisciplinary work, I think, are a signature of Duke. We have the Global Health Institute. We have many institutes that are working on problems related to society, and President Broadhead's tagline, knowledge in the service of society, that has guided many of our efforts at Duke in the past few years. So I think we're more nimble than some of the older institutions in terms of both our abilities to come up with strategic ways to make ourselves better, to work towards bringing people together from diverse areas. So I don't know that I could say it's one thing that's made Duke such a special place, of course, besides basketball and other endeavors.
Dr. Allen, in this Duke Today series on diversity and excellence, Provost Peter Lang is quoted as saying that Duke has made some gains but is not ready to declare victory yet. Is there a vision for victory in this area that, hey, the work's done and it's time to move on or go back to the labs or take the eye off the ball?
I think it would be wonderful if we get to a point where we don't have to have dedicated personnel and resources to work on this, but we aren't there yet. We do have more work to do. My hope is that my job would become obsolete when we get to an ideal state where all people are included in what we do and are able to achieve their best successes and who can live in a tolerant and inclusive environment.
Great, Dr. Allen. This has been a great conversation. As we get ready to wrap up here, what would you say to, say, a young woman looking to go into an academic career, maybe even medicine as yourself, lessons learned along the way the landscapes change? What would you say to that young woman who's maybe applying pre-med right now?
I'd say certainly medicine is a wonderful field. It gives lots of flexibility in terms of area of work, what discipline you want to work in, whether you want to be a surgeon or a radiologist or a dermatologist, and that there are ways to help in terms of balancing personal life issues and career issues over the span of one's whole career. So I think it's a very exciting time to be a faculty member at Duke, whether one is in medicine or in arts and sciences or in the School of Law or any of the other wonderful schools we have at Duke. And I would hope that people know that there are resources and that there are folks across the institution working on making this an even better place.
Dr. Allen, thank you for taking time to hold your office hours with us today. For people interested in the series on diversity and excellence, visit duke.edu/today. To learn more about Duke, visit duke.edu.